Hello everyone and welcome to week 1, day 5. Now on day 5 of every week, I'll try to help you with your preparation for the speaking part of the exam. Now obviously I can't practice speaking with you, but what I can do is tell you what to expect, how to prepare, and what to get ready in terms of getting yourself ready for the speaking exam. So when you walk through the door, you're as prepared as you could possibly be, and nothing will be a surprise, and you'll have the tools and skills to get the best possible marks. So today I want to go through the basics to the speaking exam part 1. Now part 1 for the FCE or for the CAE is pretty much the same thing. So let's go through the basics now. Okay, in part 1 of the speaking exam, what's the aim of the question? Well, these are simple introductory questions. Simple introductory questions. They're there, or they are being asked to relax you, to make you feel good about your English. They don't want to throw you in at the deep end to see if you can sink or swim. They want to give you a gentle introduction into the speaking exam, get some simple questions going, get the English flowing. The aim of these questions are not to cause you problems. So these are not questions for you to panic about. These should be natural, everyday questions. And if you've practiced your speaking skills enough, then these should be like water off a duck's back. In other words, this should be easy peasy lemon squeezy. And it's an easy way to get some marks, because if you go into the first part of the introductory or the first part of the exam and you start letting the vocabulary and the language structures flow, straight away you start putting the examiners in a better frame of mind. And I'll go into the psychology of the examiners a little bit later on. Now, there are some key things to know about the speaking exam in general. First of all, when you walk through the door, you'll see that there are 2 examiners. There'll be one person who will be sitting in the corner who will be listening to you, and there'll be another examiner that says hello and does all of the talking. So don't be fazed by the fact that there are 2 examiners. Also, you'll be doing the exam with someone, so there'll be someone else next to you. If you are the last people to do the exam and there are 3 of you, then the exam will cater for all 3 people. So just bear in mind that if you're the last in the day, it could be with 3 people, because you can't have the speaking exam with just one person, because the other 2 of the other questions involve conversations of some kind. So in part 1, you've got to talk to the examiner, not to the other candidate. So engage with the examiner. The examiner will ask you questions. You'll respond to the examiner. And the examiner will ask you questions, as I said, simple questions, will be general, social, interactional language. So it will be everyday topics: sport, travel, work, life, your likes, your dislikes, about school, if you go to school, if you're working, it might be some questions about working, and so on, so on, so on. The first part of the exam goes for around about 2 minutes. Other things to know about the exam. First of all, even though you're engaging with the examiner, that doesn't mean you just switch off. When the other candidate is talking, show an active interest in the other candidate. And that's a good rule for the whole of the speaking exam, not just the first question. So when the other person is speaking, don't just turn off and look at the ceiling. Show interest, show as if you're engaged. And that's really useful, because if you can refer back to what the other candidate said later on in the exam, it shows that you're listening, and the examiners will be looking for this interest and referring back, if it's possible to do so. So the first thing is, be interested in what the other person is saying. The exam, as I said, or the first part of the exam, is about 2 minutes long. So in practice, that means about 1 minute each. So for the first part of the exam, you should be ready to speak from about 1 minute to 1 minute 30 about a particular topic. Of course, this is something that you can practice. The examiners read from a script. That might be helpful to know, and I'll show you in a second what that script looks like. So the examiners have to follow what's written on the piece of paper that they have. They can't just invent things and ask questions from wherever they want to ask. They have a script in front of them which they follow, or they're not allowed to go from that script too far. Now, for the FCE, you might have 2 questions. So you'll definitely have one question. Obviously, you have to say something. But there could be a follow-up question. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. For the CAE, you will have 2 questions. You will have a simple introductory question, and then straight away the examiner will ask you something, another question from a list that the examiner has. So FCE, prepare yourself for 2 questions. For CAE, know that you will have 2 questions. As you can see behind me, this is the script and the questions from the FCE Part 1 speaking question. So you can see, as you go into the room, the examiners will say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. They'll introduce themselves, and then they'll ask for your names. Then they'll ask for your mark sheets. And they'll say, where are you from, and you, and then they'd like to know something about you. So there'll be this script or a variation of this script. And as you can see, the examiner's got here, there are actually more questions, but here there's just two sections that I'll show you about likes and dislikes. And you can see how you might have 2 questions. So how do you like to spend your evenings? What do you do in the evenings? And then why? Or do you prefer to spend time on your own with other people? And then why? And so on, so on. So you might have a follow-up question, but this is something that you really should practice for, and if you can't speak for a minute about these things, then you really need to get into the habit of practicing that skill. And this is the script for the CAE Part 1. So the introduction is the same kind of thing. As you go into the room, the examiners will introduce themselves. They'll ask for your names, they'll ask for your mark sheets, because you'll carry your mark sheets into the exam, and then they'll say, ask one question from the first 4, where are you from, what do you do here, how long have you been studying English, what do you enjoy most about learning English. Now, you should be able to string together a couple of sentences with advanced vocabulary to start showing off your English skills. So what do you enjoy most about learning English? Don't just say meeting other people. You could say something like, I love the opportunity to travel abroad and be able to communicate with a number of different nationalities. Something sexy like that. And then that's followed up by a slightly more involved question. What free time activity do you most enjoy, and why? Now remember, the examiners have got about 15 minutes, I think, for the whole exam. This part is around about 2 minutes long, so the examiners will cut you off after about a minute or so. So get stuck into the vocabulary, start showing off your skills, but be prepared to be interrupted by the examiner at around about the 1 minute mark. So how do you do well? First of all, know what's going to happen. So we know what's going to happen. We know what part 1 is. We know for the FCE you might have 2 questions. For the CAE definitely will have 2 questions. You know that the examiners are reading from a script and that they'll help you as they come into the room. You know part 1 is about relaxing you and getting you to start speaking English and feeling confident about your English. And you can, of course, practice questions. There are a large number of questions that you can find on the internet, or indeed your course books, about part 1, how to introduce yourself and how to talk about everyday topics. You've got to practice, and you can do this very simply. Set a stop clock, 1 minute. Go onto a news page, for example, BBC News, have a look at a topic, whether it's education, whether it's society, whether it's friends, family, whatever it might be. Just speak for a minute about that topic. And keep on going, keep on going. Work with the clock, work against that minute, and make sure that you can keep on talking for 1 minute. That's the first challenge. The second challenge then becomes saying something a little bit more advanced or a little bit sexier in that minute. So filling the minute with simple sentences. Okay, you're talking for a minute, but filling that minute with wonderful advanced language which shows off your skills, is easy to do as long as you practice. Now, you might be tempted to memorize a script. Please don't. The examiners are experienced examiners. They know if you've rehearsed something. They just know it. So particularly if they ask a question and then you give them a completely different answer because that's the answer you've memorized, you won't get any marks. You might rehearse and memorize Shakespeare. It ain't going to help you in this exam. So it's about listening to the question, reacting to the question correctly, and interacting with the examiner and giving them, showing them that you can speak English and your range of skills. One way to do this is to record yourself and learn. So everyone's got a smartphone nowadays. Record yourself for a minute. Get used to watching yourself on the screen. Get used to listening to yourself answering questions. As you listen to yourself, ask yourself, what could I have said here? How could I improve this? What else could I have said? What other vocabulary do I know? Where can I go from this? And this should be part of your practicing and learning schedule. Practice thinking on your feet. In other words, get used to reacting very, very quickly. Now, you're going to have to do this in the speaking exam and you're going to have to do this in the writing exam. So this is something that you should be doing anyhow in terms of practicing. But practice thinking on your feet. And a couple of ways that you can do this is by playing the yes-no game. And the yes-no game is really, really simple. All you have to do is someone asks you a question and you cannot say yes or no. So you've got to think of other ways to communicate a yes-no answer without saying yes or no. Or if you know the board game Taboo, this is also a fantastic game which forces you to think of another way to say something because you can't use certain words. So you've got to practice being able to react and say something for a minute at just a few seconds' notice. And probably the most important thing, which not many people know about, but I think is hugely, hugely important when you're going into the speaking exam, is a good attitude. And what do I mean by this? Well, on a speaking exam, the examiners will be in the room, and they'll be in the room, presumably, for a good few hours. They'll be swapping positions, for one exam, the person in the corner might be asking the questions and then they might swap, so they'll share roles. But they'll be in that room probably for a good few hours. Now, I've done examining myself, and when you're examining students for a good few hours, it does get kind of boring. It's hard work. You get tired very, very quickly. You're concentrating all of the time as an examiner, so on, so on. So if someone comes into the room with a bad attitude, then this doesn't help psychologically the examiner. The examiner looks at the person who's not very interested, doesn't want to be there, and the examiner's already thinking, oh my God, this is going to be difficult. And that might negatively affect your speaking result. However, if you go into the speaking exam full of energy, a bright smile on your face, hi, my name is, react, interact, be interested, smile, then the examiner, particularly at the end of a long day, will react to this. The examiner will be lifted. The examiner might be persuaded to give you the benefit of the doubt if you're making one or two mistakes in the speaking exam. So a good attitude as you walk in the door, be bright, be positive, be confident, and you probably will get the benefit of one or two little errors if you make errors during the exam. Okay, so there we go. Quite a lot of basics for part one of the speaking exam. Quite a lot of things to practice. Quite a lot of things to be aware of, because it's the most important thing to know what will happen as much as it's possible to know, so you can prepare for it. So, just like the writing exam, or indeed any part of the exam, if you just turn up on the day and do it, you're not going to do yourself any favours. But if you practice, if you know what's going to happen, if you've practiced the questions, if you're ready to react, if you've got a bright attitude, a smile, and you're ready to go, this will work for you and you will see the benefit of your hard work. Okay, good work for this week. I hope you've seen all of the exercises that I've done this week, and I'll see you again next week for week 2, where we'll have a look at even more exam preparation and get you ready for your English exams. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.